The morning sun cast long shadows across the dusty main street of Willow Creek as Abigail Matthews clutched the worn rope in her trembling hands, fighting back tears that threatened to spill down her sun-weathered cheeks. The small goat at her side, her last possession of any worth, bleated softly, as if sensing its impending fate. It was 1878, and the West was unforgiving to a woman alone. "Come on, Daisy," Abigail whispered, her voice catching as she led the reluctant animal toward the livestock auction at the edge of town. 3 years of drought had claimed everything else: her small farm, her husband to consumption, and now, finally, her dignity. The wooden sign of Thornton's auction house loomed ahead, paint peeling from the harsh Wyoming weather. Men in dusty hats gathered around, sizing up the day's offerings with calculating eyes. Abigail felt their gazes shift to her as she approached a young widow of 22 in a patched dress that had once been blue but had faded to the color of the endless sky above. $5, she rehearsed under her breath. "Won't take less than $5. It wouldn't be enough to start over, but it might buy her passage east, back to the family who had warned her against marrying a man with nothing but dreams and a land claim. As Abigail joined the line of sellers, a tall figure on horseback caught her attention. Unlike the other local ranchers in their worn clothing, this man sat straight in his saddle, his dark hat pulled low over his eyes. His bay stallion stamped impatiently, sensing its rider's restlessness. "Next," called the auctioneer, a portly man with greedy eyes. Abigail stepped forward, gently tugging Daisy's rope. "I have a healthy nanny goat, 3 years old. Good milk producer." The auctioneer barely glanced at the animal. "Start the bidding at $2. "But she's worth at least $5, Abigail protested, her voice stronger than she felt. $2 for the goat," the man repeated flatly. "Take it or leave it, Mrs. Matthews. Times are hard for everyone." The crowd remained silent, not even the courtesy of a bid. Abigail felt her face flush with humiliation. "I'll give you 3, came a deep voice from behind her. Abigail turned to find the tall stranger had dismounted and now stood closer than she'd realized. His eyes were the color of the creek after rainfall, clear and intense beneath the shadow of his hat. $3, the auctioneer announced, sounding bored. "Going once, actually," the stranger interrupted, his gaze fixed on Abigail. "I have a better offer." He stepped forward, close enough that she could smell leather and the faint scent of soap, a rarity in these parts. "That goat isn't worth $3 to me, madam, but I've got a proposition that might interest you more." The crowd hushed, and Abigail felt her spine stiffen with apprehension. "I'm Caleb Turner," he continued, removing his hat in a gesture of respect that seemed from another time. "I've got a ranch 10 miles west of here. Good land, good water. I need someone to help me run it, cook, keep house." He paused, seeming to choose his next words carefully. "Come home with me instead. Bring your goat. I'll pay you fair wages, and you'll have a roof over your head." A murmur rippled through the onlookers. Abigail clutched Daisy's rope tighter, suspicion warring with desperate hope. "And what else would you expect in return, Mr. Turner?" she asked quietly, her voice steady despite her racing heart. The corner of his mouth lifted slightly. "Just honest work, Mrs. Matthews. I've got no dishonorable intentions. You'd have your own room with a lock on the door." He glanced around at the listening crowd and lowered his voice. "I know what it's like to be at the end of your rope. I'm offering you a chance, nothing more." Abigail studied him, the calloused hands that spoke of hard work, the clean-shaven face that suggested discipline, the eyes that held no mockery. The decision shouldn't have been difficult. She had nowhere to go, no money to get there. Yet pride made her hesitate. "Why me?" she finally asked. "Because you're still fighting," he answered simply. "Most would have given up by now." Before Abigail could respond, a commotion broke out at the far end of the street. Shouts and the thunder of hooves drew everyone's attention as 3 riders galloped into town, guns drawn. "Bank robbers," someone yelled, and chaos erupted. Without hesitation, Caleb grabbed Abigail's arm and pulled her behind the auction platform as gunshots rang out. Daisy bleated in terror, straining at her rope. "Stay down," Caleb ordered, drawing his revolver. His eyes scanned the street, calculating. "My goat," Abigail began, but he cut her off. "I'll get her. Don't move." Before she could protest, he was gone, ducking low through the panicked crowd. Abigail watched in disbelief as he reached Daisy, untied her, and began leading her back just as one of the robbers spotted him. The outlaw raised his gun, but Caleb was faster. A single shot from his revolver sent the man tumbling from his horse. The other robbers, seeing their companion fall, wheeled their mounts and fled, the town's hastily assembled posse in pursuit. Caleb returned, slightly breathless, with Daisy in tow. "You all right?" he asked, his eyes quickly assessing her for injury. Abigail nodded, words momentarily beyond her. "My offer still stands," he said, handing her the goat's rope. "But we should decide quickly. Those men might have friends." In that moment, looking at this stranger who had risked his life for her goat, for her Abigail, made her choice. "Yes," she said, the word feeling like both surrender and salvation. "I'll come." The journey to Caleb Turner's ranch passed in near silence, with Abigail riding behind him on his stallion while Daisy trotted alongside, secured by a lead rope. The landscape gradually changed from the flat plains surrounding Willow Creek to rolling hills dotted with pine trees. As they crested a particularly steep rise, a valley opened up before them, a stream cutting through its center like a silver ribbon. "There it is," Caleb said, the first words he'd spoken in over an hour. "Turner's Rest." Abigail peered over his shoulder. A substantial log house stood in the valley's heart, smoke curling from its stone chimney. A barn and several outbuildings clustered nearby, and in the distance, she could make out cattle grazing on lush grass, a stark contrast to the drought-stricken land she'd left behind. "It's beautiful," she said honestly, wondering how one man had managed to build all this. "Been working it for 5 years," he replied, urging his horse down the slope. "Used to belong to my uncle. Left it to me when he passed." As they approached, Abigail noticed details she'd missed from afar: the vegetable garden beside the house, the flowers growing wild along the fence row, the sturdy corral where several horses watched their approach with pricked ears. "You live here alone?" she asked, suddenly wondering about the wisdom of her decision. "Just me and Rufus," Caleb answered. Before she could ask who Rufus was, an enormous shaggy dog came bounding around the house, barking enthusiastically. Daisy bleated in alarm and tried to hide behind the horse. "That's Rufus," Caleb explained unnecessarily as he reined in. "He won't hurt your goat, but it might take them a while to get used to each other." He dismounted and reached up to help Abigail down. His hands were strong and sure at her waist, lifting her as if she weighed nothing. For a moment, they stood too close, and Abigail stepped back quickly, flustered by her reaction to this nearness. "I'll show you where you'll be staying," Caleb said, seeming not to notice her discomfort. "Then I can give you a tour of the place if you'd like." The house was larger than it had appeared from a distance, 5 rooms downstairs, and what Caleb explained were 2 bedrooms upstairs. The furniture was simple but well made, and everything was surprisingly clean for a bachelor's dwelling. "This will be your room," he said, showing her to a bedroom at the back of the house. It was small but pleasant, with a narrow bed, a chest of drawers, and a rocking chair by the window that overlooked the garden. As promised, there was a sturdy lock on the door. "The kitchen's through there," he continued, pointing. "Bathroom's out back. I dug a proper outhouse, not just a hole in the ground. There's a pump in the kitchen for water, and I keep a rain barrel outside for washing." Abigail nodded, taking it all in. It was more comfort than she'd had in months. "What will my duties be?" she asked, setting down the small bundle of possessions she'd carried with her. "Cooking, cleaning, mending," Caleb replied. "I can hunt and chop wood, but I'm a terrible cook, as Rufus will attest." The dog, who had followed them inside, wagged his tail at the mention of his name. "In the spring, if you're still here, I could use help with the garden. It's gone half wild since I took over." "And my wages?" $10 a month, plus room and board for you and your goat." He met her eyes directly. "It's fair pay for what I'm asking." It was more than fair, and they both knew it. Abigail had expected half that amount. "When do I start?" she asked. "Tomorrow's soon enough. You should rest today." The ride wasn't easy for someone not used to it. She wanted to protest that she wasn't delicate, but the truth was her back ached and her legs felt wobbly from the hours on horseback. "Thank you," she said instead. "I'll make supper tonight, though. It's the least I can do." Caleb nodded. "I need to tend to the horse and settle your goat somewhere safe. There's food in the pantry, use whatever you need." After he left, Abigail stood alone in her new room, uncertain whether she'd made the wisest choice or the most foolish mistake of her life. But as she unpacked her meager belongings, a change of clothes, a hairbrush, her husband's pocket watch that no longer worked, and a worn Bible, she felt something she hadn't experienced in a long time: hope. That evening, she prepared a simple meal of beans, bacon, and cornbread. It wasn't fancy, but Caleb ate as if it were a feast, thanking her with a sincerity that made her flush with pleasure. "Been a while since I had a proper meal," he said, wiping his plate clean with the last of the cornbread. "Usually just throw something in a pot and hope for the best." "I'm glad you enjoyed it," Abigail replied, pleased despite herself. As they washed the dishes together, he insisted on helping. Caleb told her more about the ranch and his plans for it. He wanted to expand the herd, maybe try raising horses as well as cattle. The stream provided reliable water even in drought years, and he'd been slowly buying adjacent land when he could afford it. "What about you?" he asked finally. "If you don't mind my asking, how did you end up at that auction with just a goat to your name?" Abigail's hands stilled in the dishwater. She hadn't spoken of her troubles to anyone, had borne them silently as a good wife should, even after becoming a widow. "My husband, Thomas, brought us west 3 years ago," she began slowly. "He had dreams of building a cattle empire. We started with 10 acres and 6 cows." She smiled faintly at the memory of their optimism. "The first year was good. We added to the herd, planted crops. Then the drought came." She described how they'd watched their crops wither and their cattle grow thin. How Thomas had worked himself to exhaustion trying to dig a deeper well to save what they could. How pneumonia had taken him in the second winter, leaving her alone with mounting debts and dwindling resources. "I sold everything, piece by piece," she finished quietly. "The land went to the bank. The furniture to neighbors. Daisy was the last thing I had that was worth anything." Caleb listened without interrupting, his expression grave. When she finished, he simply said, "You're stronger than most men I know, Abigail Matthews." Coming from him, it felt like the highest compliment. That night, lying in a real bed for the first time in months, Abigail stared at the ceiling and listened to the unfamiliar sounds of her new home: the distant lowing of cattle, the whispering of wind through pine needles, the occasional howl of a coyote. From somewhere in the house came the soft snoring of Rufus. It was peaceful in a way Willow Creek had never been, with its saloons and frequent gunfights. She thought of Caleb Turner, with his quiet strength and unexpected kindness. He was a mystery educated from his speech, yet choosing the solitary life of a rancher. Generous, yet reserved. Handsome, in a rugged way, yet apparently uninterested in finding a wife. Despite being of an age, she guessed around 30, when most men were long married with children. Abigail turned on her side, pushing such thoughts away. She was here to work, nothing more. Romance was a luxury she could no longer afford, and her heart was still tender from loss. Whatever Caleb's story was, it wasn't her concern. She would do her job, save her wages, and eventually move on to rebuild her life elsewhere. With that resolution firmly in mind, she closed her eyes and drifted into the deepest sleep she'd known since becoming a widow. The following weeks established a routine that brought unexpected comfort to Abigail's days. She rose before dawn to prepare breakfast, usually biscuits, eggs, and coffee, which was ready by the time Caleb came in from his early morning chores. They ate together in companionable silence, then parted ways for the day's work. While Caleb tended the cattle, repaired fences, or worked with the horses, Abigail transformed the neglected house into a proper home. She scrubbed floors, washed linens that had grown gray with improper care, reorganized the chaotic pantry, and slowly coaxed the kitchen into submission. In the afternoons, she tended to Daisy, who had adjusted surprisingly well to ranch life and now shared a corner of the barn with the milk cow. At first, their conversations over supper were brief and practical discussions about supplies needed from town, weather predictions, or tasks for the following day. But gradually, as comfort grew between them, they began to share more. Abigail learned that Caleb had fought for the Union in the Civil War, enlisting at 18. He'd returned changed, like so many others, and had wandered westward seeking a peace he couldn't define. His uncle's ranch had given him purpose again, a reason to build rather than destroy. In turn, she told him about her childhood in Pennsylvania, her father's work as a blacksmith, her mother's talents as a seamstress. How she'd met Thomas at a church social and been swept away by his dreams and charisma. How she defied her parents to marry him and journey west. "Do you regret it?" Caleb asked one evening as they sat on the porch, watching the sunset paint the valley in gold and crimson. "Coming west, I mean." Abigail considered the question seriously. "No," she finally said. "It was hard, and losing Thomas was." She paused, searching for words. "It broke something in me, but I learned I'm stronger than I knew. I wouldn't trade that knowledge." Caleb nodded, understanding in his eyes. The West has a way of stripping you down to your true self. Some find they're less than they thought. Others, like you, discover they're more. His words warmed her in a way that had nothing to do with the dying sun. As October gave way to November, the air grew sharp with the promise of winter. Caleb spent long days preparing the ranch, chopping firewood, securing buildings against the coming snow, ensuring adequate feed for the livestock. Abigail assisted where she could, taking on more outdoor tasks as she grew stronger and more confident. One afternoon, as she helped him stack firewood beside the house, she noticed him watching her with an odd expression. "What is it?" she asked, brushing sawdust from her skirts. "Have I got dirt on my face again?" He shook his head slowly. "You've changed since you came here." "How so?" She wasn't sure if this was criticism or a compliment. "You walk taller," he said. "Your eyes have light in them now. And you laugh sometimes." Abigail hadn't realized she'd been so transparent, either in her earlier despair or her gradual healing. "Is that a good thing?" she asked, suddenly self-conscious. "It's a very good thing," he answered simply, and returned to his work. That night, a storm blew in from the north, bringing the first heavy snow of the season. Abigail woke to the sound of wind howling around the eaves and rose to find the world transformed into a white wilderness. Drifts piled against the house, and the barn was barely visible through the swirling flakes. Worried about the animals, she dressed quickly in her warmest clothes and was pulling on boots when Caleb entered the kitchen, snow melting on his shoulders. "Already checked on everything," he said, stomping his feet to dislodge the snow. "Cattle are in the sheltered valley. Horses and your goat are snug in the barn." Relief flooded her. "Thank you. I was concerned about Daisy." "She's fine. Stealing hay from the horses, actually." He grinned, and Abigail couldn't help smiling back. Daisy's kleptomaniacal tendencies had become a running joke between them. The storm lasted 3 days, keeping them housebound except for necessary trips to the barn. They passed the time with tasks that had been postponed during busier days, Caleb repairing tools and tack, Abigail mending clothes and attempting to teach herself to knit using some old needles and yarn she'd found in a drawer. On the evening of the third day, as they sat before the fire, Caleb surprised her by producing a battered chess set from a trunk in the corner. "Do you play?" he asked, setting up the pieces on a small table between them. "My father taught me," Abigail replied, "but I haven't played in years." "I'll go easy on you, then," he promised with a hint of challenge in his eyes. He did no such thing, defeating her soundly in their first game. But Abigail's competitive spirit awakened, and she insisted on a rematch. The second game lasted longer, with Abigail recalling strategies her father had taught her. Though Caleb still won, it was a closer contest. "You're a quick study," he conceded as they reset the board for a third match. "But you need to think more moves ahead." "Like you do with the ranch," she observed. "Always planning for next season, next year." He looked up, surprised. "Yes, exactly like that. Life and chess aren't so different. The best players anticipate problems before they arise." "And what problems do you anticipate, Caleb Turner?" The question slipped out before she could consider its implications. His hands stilled on the chess pieces, and for a moment, Abigail feared she'd overstepped. But when he spoke, his voice was thoughtful rather than offended. "The obvious ones: weather, illness, market prices. But there are others." He met her eyes across the board. "Loneliness. Growing old with no one to share the burden or the joy. Building something that will die with me because there's no one to pass it to." The raw honesty of his words caught Abigail off guard. This wasn't the kind of conversation men typically had with their housekeepers. "I thought the same after Thomas died," she admitted. "That I'd be alone forever. That everything we'd worked for was meaningless because it ended with us." And now, his question hung in the air between them, weighted with meaning she wasn't ready to examine. "Now I take each day as it comes," she answered carefully, "and try to be grateful for what I have rather than mourning what I've lost." He nodded slowly. "A wise approach." Then, deliberately lightening the mood, he added, "Your move, Mrs. Matthews." They played until the fire burned low, and Abigail finally conceded defeat for the third time. As she rose to retire for the night, Caleb said quietly, "Thank you." "For what?" she asked, puzzled. "For making this house feel like a home again." The words followed Abigail into her dreams, where Caleb's face blended with memories of Thomas in a way that left her restless and confused come morning. December brought clearer weather, but deeper cold. The routine of ranch life continued, albeit modified for winter conditions. Caleb spent shorter days outside, using the extra indoor time to repair equipment, plan spring planting, and catch up on correspondence. Abigail discovered he subscribed to several newspapers and agricultural journals, another indication of his education. Occasionally, she would find him reading poetry Whitman or Tennyson, his lips moving silently with the words. These glimpses into his inner life intrigued her more than she cared to admit. As Christmas approached, a melancholy settled over Abigail. It would be her first holiday without family, without Thomas. Though she tried to maintain her cheerful demeanor, Caleb noticed the change. "We don't have to celebrate," he said one evening as they finished supper. "If it's too difficult." His perception startled her. "No, I'd like to observe Christmas," she insisted. "It just feels strange, that's all. Different." Caleb nodded, understanding without need for further explanation. "Then we'll make new traditions," he said simply. 2 days later, he disappeared after breakfast without explanation. When he returned in the afternoon, his horse was dragging a pine tree. "Thought we could use this," he said, as if bringing home Christmas trees was an everyday occurrence. "Found it in the north pasture." Together, they set up the tree in the parlor, a room they rarely used. Abigail improvised decoration strings of dried berries, paper stars cut from old newspapers, pine cones dipped in flour paste to look snow-covered. Caleb contributed candles, carefully placed to avoid fire hazards. When they finished, He surprised her again by producing a small wooden box from his coat pocket. "This was my mother's," he said, opening it to reveal a delicate glass angel. "She always said it wasn't Christmas without her on the tree." The trust implied in sharing this family treasure touched Abigail deeply. With reverent hands, she placed the angel at the top of their tree, adjusting her until she seemed to hover over the homemade decorations below. "She's beautiful," Abigail whispered. "Yes," Caleb agreed, but when she turned, she found him looking not at the angel but at her. The moment stretched between them, taut with unspoken feelings. Then Rufus barked outside, breaking the spell, and Caleb stepped back. "I should check on the animals," he said, his voice oddly rough. "Storm's coming in again." After he left, Abigail stood alone in the parlor, her heart racing with emotions she'd thought long buried. She was attracted to Caleb Turner, had been, perhaps, since that first day at the auction. But acting on such feelings would complicate everything. She was his employee, dependent on his goodwill. And her heart had already been broken once. She wasn't sure it could withstand another fracture. Yet as she prepared for bed that night, she found herself lingering at the mirror, studying her reflection with new eyes. The gaunt desperation that had marked her face in Willow Creek had been replaced by healthy color. Her honey blonde hair, once dull with worry, now shone in the lamplight. The woman looking back at her seemed both familiar and strange, stronger, more confident, but also more vulnerable in ways she couldn't quite define. Christmas morning dawned clear and cold, the fresh snow glittering in the early light. Abigail rose early to prepare a special breakfast: pancakes with preserved blackberries, bacon, and coffee with a splash of the precious vanilla extract she'd been saving for a special occasion. She was just setting the table when Caleb came in, his arms full of firewood. "Merry Christmas," he greeted her, his breath visible in the still chilly kitchen. "Merry Christmas," she returned, suddenly shy. "Breakfast is almost ready. It smells wonderful." He stacked the wood by the stove, then hesitated. "I have something for you. A gift." "It's not much, but—" "Oh," Abigail interrupted, flustered. "I have something for you too. Let me get it." She hurried to her room and retrieved the package she'd hidden beneath her bed, a new woolen scarf she'd knitted in secret, her fingers growing more confident with each row. It wasn't perfect, but she was proud of the even stitches and deep blue color that matched his eyes. When she returned to the kitchen, Caleb was waiting with a small cloth-wrapped bundle. They exchanged gifts with awkward formality, each insisting the other open theirs first. Finally, Abigail unwrapped her present to find a leather-bound journal and a fountain pen. "I noticed you writing sometimes, using scraps of paper," Caleb explained. "Thought you might like something proper for your thoughts." The thoughtfulness of the gift overwhelmed her. She'd been jotting down memories, recipes, and occasional poems on whatever paper she could find, never mentioning this habit to him. "It's perfect," she said, running her fingers over the smooth leather. "Thank you." Caleb unwrapped his scarf next, genuine pleasure lighting his face as he examined her handiwork. "You made this?" he asked, wrapping it around his neck immediately. "No one's made me anything since my mother died." "It's not very sophisticated," Abigail apologized. "It's the finest gift I've received in years," he contradicted firmly. "Thank you, Abigail." The use of her first name, rare in their daily interactions, sent a pleasant shiver through her. They spent the day in peaceful companionship, enjoying a Christmas dinner of roast chicken and all the trimmings. As darkness fell, they sat before the fire, the chessboard between them as had become their custom on quiet evenings. "I have a confession," Caleb said as he contemplated his next move. "When I offered you this position, I wasn't entirely honest about my reasons." Abigail's hand froze above her bishop. "What do you mean?" He kept his eyes on the board. "I said I needed help running the ranch. That was true. But I could have hired anyone to cook from town, a ranch hand's wife looking for extra income." He looked up then, his expression serious. I chose you because I saw something in you that day, a spirit that refused to be broken. It reminded me of myself after the war. I don't understand, Abigail said, though part of her did, viscerally. I was offering myself a second chance as much as offering you one, he explained. The ranch was thriving, but I was existing, not living. Then I saw you with that goat, standing tall despite everything, and something woke up in me. He smiled faintly. I've been alone a long time, Abigail. By choice at first, then by habit. The chess game forgotten. Abigail struggled to find words. Why are you telling me this now? Because Christmas is for truth-telling, he said simply. And because your wages for December are in that envelope on the mantel, along with enough extra to take you anywhere you want to go, should you choose to leave. He held up a hand to forestall her protest. Your 3 months trial period is nearly up. I wanted you to know you have choices. Abigail sat very still, absorbing his words. And if I choose to stay? Then we renegotiate terms, he replied. As equals. The implication hung in the air between them. This wasn't merely about employment anymore. I need time to think, she said finally. Caleb nodded, respecting her caution. Take all the time you need. Nothing changes unless you want it to. They finished their game in silence, each move weighted with new significance. When Abigail finally retired to her room, her mind whirled with possibilities she'd long since dismissed from her life. Could she trust again? Risk her heart? Build a future with this man who had saved her from destitution but asked nothing in return except honest work? She thought of Thomas, his charm, his dreams, his ultimate failure to provide the security he'd promised. Caleb was different, steadier, more practical, yet with depths she was only beginning to discover. He had built something real here, something that could last. And she had helped make it a home. Sleep eluded her as she weighed her options, fears battling against hope well into the night. When dawn finally broke, Abigail rose, her decision made. New Year's Eve arrived with another snowstorm, this one gentle enough to blanket the world in beauty without threatening danger. Abigail spent the day preparing a special dinner: venison stew, cornbread, and an apple pie made from the last of the preserved fruit. She had said nothing of her decision in the days following Christmas, and Caleb had respected her silence, maintaining their comfortable routine while giving her space to think. But the tension between them had grown, charged with unspoken possibilities. As evening approached, Abigail changed into her best dress, a simple blue cotton that had seen better days, but was clean and pressed. She brushed her hair until it shone, then pinned it up more carefully than usual, leaving a few curls to frame her face. Looking in the small mirror, she hardly recognized herself, not the desperate widow from Willow Creek, nor the dutiful wife she'd been before that, but someone new, someone of her own making. Caleb was in the parlor when she entered, adding wood to the fire. He turned at her approach, and the look on his face, surprise followed by undisguised admiration, gave her courage. I've made my decision, she said without preamble. He straightened slowly, his expression guarded. And I'm staying? She took a deep breath. But not as your housekeeper. Understanding dawned in his eyes, followed by hope so naked it almost hurt to witness. What terms would you propose, Mrs. Matthews? He asked, his voice carefully controlled. Abigail moved closer, close enough to see the flecks of gold in his blue eyes. Partnership, she said firmly. In all things. I've learned I'm good at building a home and making things grow. You've built the foundation of something worth preserving here. Together, we could make it thrive. Partnership, he repeated, as if testing the word. That's a significant commitment. I'm aware, she replied. And I don't make it lightly. I was hasty once, marrying Thomas after knowing him only a few months. I've had time to observe you, Caleb Turner. To see your character in action, not just in words. And The question was barely audible. And I believe you're a man worth building a life with. She smiled slightly. If you'll have me. The control he'd maintained cracked, joy spreading across his features like sunrise. If I'll have you, he echoed with a short laugh. Abigail, I've been falling in love with you since the moment you stood up to that auctioneer. The confession sent warmth flooding through her. You never said anything. You needed time to heal, he explained. And I needed to prove myself trustworthy. After what you'd been through, pretty words wouldn't have been enough. He was right, she realized. Had he declared himself too soon, she would have suspected ulterior motives or fleeting passion. So, Caleb continued, taking her hands in his, are we discussing a business arrangement or something more? Abigail's heart raced at his touch. Both, she admitted. I'm not ready to marry again, not yet. But I'd like to court properly, to build something together and see where it leads. I can accept those terms, he said, his thumbs tracing circles on her palms. On one condition. Which is? His eyes crinkled at the corners. That I may kiss you to seal our agreement. It being New Year's Eve and all. Abigail felt heat rise to her cheeks. That seems appropriate, she managed, her voice not quite steady. Caleb released her hands only to frame her face gently between his palms. He leaned down slowly, giving her every chance to change her mind. But Abigail had no intention of retreating. She rose on tiptoe to meet him halfway. The kiss was tentative at first, a question rather than a demand. Then, as Abigail responded, it deepened into something more certain, a promise, a beginning. His arms slipped around her waist, drawing her closer, and she found herself clutching the front of his shirt, anchoring herself against the flood of sensation. When they finally parted, both slightly breathless, Caleb rested his forehead against hers. Happy New Year, Abigail Matthews, he whispered. Happy New Year, Caleb Turner, she replied, knowing the words held new meaning now, the promise of a shared future, of possibilities neither had dared imagine months before. Outside, snow continued to fall, covering the land in a pristine blanket that awaited spring's renewal. Inside, warmth and hope banished the ghosts of past sorrows, making room for a love as unexpected as it was profound. The winter days that followed passed in a rhythm of work and discovery as Abigail and Caleb negotiated their new relationship. By day, they maintained their usual routines, he managing the livestock and land, she keeping the household, but now they collaborated more, sharing decisions and planning together for the ranch's future. By evening, they explored the delicate dance of courtship, learning each other's stories and dreams over chess games and fireside conversations. Caleb proved to be a patient suitor, never pushing for more than Abigail was ready to give, respecting the boundaries she set as her heart healed and opened to new possibilities. January brought blizzards that confined them to the house for days at a time. During one such storm, Caleb taught Abigail to play the harmonica, an instrument he'd carried through the war as his only luxury. Her first attempts produced sounds that sent Rufus hiding under the table, but eventually she mastered "Oh Susanna" well enough to accompany Caleb's surprisingly rich baritone. In February, when the weather cleared enough for travel, they made the journey into Willow Creek together for supplies. Abigail held her head high as they rode down the main street, no longer the desperate widow, but a woman with purpose and protection. The same townspeople who had watched her humiliation now nodded respectfully, noting her position beside Caleb Turner, whose reputation as a fair but formidable rancher was well established. At the general store, while selecting seeds for spring planting, they encountered Mrs. Thornton, the auctioneer's wife. Mrs. Matthews, she greeted with artificial warmth, her eyes darting curiously between Abigail and Caleb. We've wondered what became of you. I see you've found employment. The insinuation in her tone was unmistakable. Before Abigail could respond, Caleb stepped forward, his hand coming to rest protectively at the small of Abigail's back. Mrs. Matthews is my business partner, he stated clearly, his voice carrying to nearby customers. She's transformed Turner's Rest with her knowledge of horticulture and household management. We're fortunate to have her expertise. Mrs. Thornton's expression soured.
How?
Progressive of you, Mr. Turner. I've always believed in recognizing talent, madam, he replied pleasantly. Regardless of conventional expectations. Abigail felt a surge of gratitude for his public acknowledgement of her role. As they left the store, packages in hand, she squeezed his arm. Thank you for that. He shrugged, helping her onto the wagon seat. It was only the truth. Though I left out the part about falling in love with my business partner. Didn't seem like Mrs. Thornton's business. The casual mention of love still thrilled Abigail, who was gradually accepting that her feelings for Caleb had indeed grown into something deep and enduring. As March arrived, bringing the first hints of spring, they began implementing plans they developed during the long winter evenings. Caleb expanded the vegetable garden to twice its previous size, following Abigail's designs for crop rotation and companion planting. Together, they repaired the chicken coop and purchased a dozen new hens to supplement the aging flock. One mild afternoon, as they worked side by side setting fence posts for a new corral, Abigail paused to watch Caleb. His strength was evident in the easy way he drove posts into the ground, but it was his gentleness that had won her heart, the way he handled newborn calves, spoke softly to nervous horses, and touched her with reverence when they shared increasingly passionate goodnight kisses. Sensing her gaze, he looked up, wiping sweat from his brow. Something on your mind? I was just thinking, she replied, about that day at the auction. How close I came to selling Daisy and taking the stage east. He drove another post into the softening ground. Do you ever regret not going? Not for a moment, she said honestly. I would have been returning to a life I'd outgrown, becoming someone's dependent again. Here, I've found. She gestured at the ranch spread before them, at the life they were building. Purpose. Partnership. Happiness. Caleb straightened, studying her with an intensity that made her pulse quicken. Is that enough? He asked quietly. Or, do you want more? The question hung between them, weighted with meaning. They hadn't discussed marriage since New Year's Eve, respecting Abigail's need for time. But in that moment, looking into his eyes, she knew her heart had made its decision long ago. I want everything, she said simply. With you. He crossed the distance between them in 3 strides, taking her hands in his dirt-stained ones. Are you saying what I think you're saying? Abigail nodded, suddenly shy despite the certainty in her heart. If you're still offering. Abigail Matthews, Caleb said, his voice rough with emotion. I've been ready to marry you since Christmas. I was just waiting for you to be ready too. Then ask me properly, she challenged, a smile tugging at her lips. Without hesitation, he dropped to one knee in the soft spring earth, still holding her hands. Abigail, you've brought light and life back to this ranch and to me. Will you do me the great honor of becoming my wife, my partner in all things, for as long as we both shall live? Yes, she answered, her voice clear and certain. Yes, I will. He rose and pulled her into his arms, kissing her with a passion that left no doubt of his feelings. Abigail returned the kiss with equal fervor, all hesitation gone. When they finally parted, both breathing quickly, Caleb pressed his forehead to hers. When, he asked simply. Soon, she replied. I don't see any reason to wait. We've already proven we can live together without murder being committed. He laughed, the sound echoing across the valley. 2 weeks? That will give us time to arrange for Reverend Phillips to come out from town and to prepare the house for a proper celebration. 2 weeks, Abigail agreed, sealing the promise with another kiss. The wedding day dawned clear and perfect, as if nature itself approved of their union. Abigail woke early, watching the sunrise from her bedroom window, the last morning she would spend in this room, as tonight she would move into Caleb's larger chamber across the hall. The thought brought a flutter of nervous anticipation. Though their courtship had included increasingly intimate moments, they had maintained certain boundaries out of respect for tradition and Abigail's previous experience. Tonight, those boundaries would dissolve. A soft knock at her door interrupted her thoughts. "Abigail?" It was Anna Jenkins, wife of Caleb's nearest neighbor, who had arrived yesterday to help with wedding preparations. "May I come in?" "Of course," Abigail called, tightening the belt of her robe. Anna entered carrying a large box. "I've brought something for you," she said, setting it on the bed. "From all the ranch wives in the valley." Curious, Abigail opened the box to find a wedding dress, simple but elegant, made of cream-colored satin with delicate lace at the collar and cuffs. "We all contributed something," Anna explained. Margaret Thompson had the satin left over from her daughter's dress. Sarah Wilkins provided the lace from her mother's tablecloth. "I did most of the sewing, with help from the others." Tears pricked Abigail's eyes as she lifted the dress. She'd planned to wear her best blue dress, having no means or opportunity to acquire a proper wedding gown. "It's beautiful," she whispered. "I don't know what to say." "Say you'll wear it," Anna smiled. "And that you'll join our quilting circle next month. We ranch wives need to stick together out here." Abigail nodded, overwhelmed by the unexpected gesture of community. Since arriving at Turner's Rest, she'd had little contact with other women, focused as she'd been on establishing her place on the ranch. "Now," Anna continued practically, "let's get you ready. The guests will be arriving soon, and we can't have the bride looking anything less than perfect." The next hours passed in a blur of preparation. Anna helped Abigail bathe and dress, arranging her hair in an elegant style adorned with wildflowers picked that morning. By the time Reverend Phillips's wagon was spotted coming up the drive, Abigail was transformed into a vision that took her own breath away when she caught her reflection in the mirror. "He won't know what hit him," Anna declared with satisfaction. Downstairs, the house had been decorated with spring flowers and greenery. A dozen guests, neighboring ranchers and their families, the storekeeper from town, and a few others who had shown kindness during Abigail's difficult days gathered in the parlor where Caleb waited with the Reverend. When Abigail descended the stairs, a collective murmur of appreciation rose from the assembly. But she had eyes only for Caleb, who stood transfixed, his expression a mixture of awe and devotion that confirmed every choice that had led her to this moment. He had traded his usual ranch clothes for a proper suit somewhat worn at the elbows, but well-fitting and dignified. His hair, usually tousled by wind and work, had been neatly combed, though one rebellious lock still fell across his forehead in a way that made Abigail's heart skip. The ceremony itself was brief, but meaningful, their vows exchanged with clear voices and unwavering certainty. When Reverend Phillips pronounced them husband and wife, Caleb's kiss was both tender and possessive, a promise of the night to come that sent heat flooding through Abigail's body. The celebration that followed lasted well into the evening, with feasting, music, and dancing in the cleared space of the main room. Neighbors who had known Caleb for years commented on the transformation of both the ranch and its owner, attributing the positive changes to Abigail's influence. "Never seen him smile so much," old Mr. Jenkins confided as they shared a piece of wedding cake. "Used to be the most serious young man in 3 counties. You've done him a world of good, Mrs. Turner." The new name startled Abigail momentarily, then settled around her like a comfortable cloak. Mrs. Turner, Caleb's wife, partner in all things. As the celebration wound down and guests departed with well wishes and knowing winks, Abigail found herself alone with Caleb at last. They stood in the doorway, watching the last wagon disappear down the drive, his arm around her waist. "Well, Mrs. Turner," he said, his voice low and intimate, "shall we retire?" The question, for all its simplicity, carried layers of meaning that sent a shiver of anticipation through her. Abigail had known marriage before, but never with the depth of emotion and understanding she shared with Caleb. This night would be a beginning in more ways than one. "Yes," she answered, turning in his arms to face him. "I believe we shall." He surprised her then, sweeping her into his arms with ease and carrying her toward the stairs. "I may be a progressive man in most respects," he explained with a grin, "but some traditions are worth honoring." Abigail laughed, wrapping her arms around his neck as he navigated the stairs. "Far be it from me to argue with tradition on my wedding day." In the privacy of what was now their bedroom, illuminated only by moonlight and a single lamp, they undressed each other slowly, reverently, each touch and kiss a discovery. Caleb's hands trembled slightly as he removed the last pins from her hair, letting it cascade over her shoulders. "You are so beautiful," he whispered. "I still can't believe you're mine." "Yours," she confirmed, guiding his hands to her waist. "As you are mine." Their union was everything Abigail had hoped for, tender yet passionate, a giving and receiving that transcended physical pleasure to become a communion of souls. In Caleb's arms, she found not only desire but acceptance, not only passion but peace. Afterward, lying in the circle of his embrace, Abigail listened to the steady beat of his heart beneath her ear and knew with absolute certainty that she had found her true home. "What are you thinking?" Caleb murmured, his fingers tracing lazy patterns on her bare shoulder. "That I'm grateful to Daisy," she replied with a smile. "If not for her, I might never have met you." He chuckled, the sound rumbling pleasantly under her cheek. "Remind me to give her an extra treat tomorrow. Though I suspect she's already feeling quite pleased with herself, having acquired an entire ranch for her retirement." "She's earned it," Abigail said. "She was a faithful friend when I had no one else." Caleb's arms tightened around her. "You'll never be alone again," he promised. "Whatever comes, we face it together." It was a vow Abigail knew he would keep, just as she would keep hers. Whatever challenges lay ahead and life on a ranch guaranteed there would be many, they would meet them as partners, drawing strength from each other and from the love that had bloomed so unexpectedly from her darkest hour. As spring yielded to summer, Turner's Rest flourished under their combined care. The vegetable garden produced bountifully, providing not only for their table, but excess to sell in town. The cattle herd increased with a successful calving season, and Caleb's experiment with horse breeding showed promising results as 2 Mares produced strong foals. Abigail found herself settling into the rhythm of ranch life with increasing confidence. The skills she'd begun developing as Thomas's wife now matured under Caleb's encouragement and her own determination. She learned to ride properly, to help with branding, to manage the accounts with a sharp eye for detail that complemented Caleb's broader vision. In the evenings, they would sit on the porch watching the sunset, planning and dreaming together. Sometimes they spoke of practical matters, building a second barn, purchasing adjacent land when it became available. Other times, their conversations turned to more personal hopes. "Do you want children?" Caleb asked one such evening in late July, the question casual, but his eyes watchful. Abigail's hand stilled on Rufus's head, where she'd been absently scratching behind his ears. "Yes," she answered honestly. "Very much. Thomas and I tried, but—" She shrugged, the old disappointment a distant ache now. "It never happened." Caleb reached for her hand, twining his fingers with hers. "Well, we have time," he said, "and a home ready to fill with little ones when the time is right." The time proved to be sooner than either expected. By September, Abigail was certain she was with child, though she kept the suspicion to herself until October, when there could be no doubt. She chose a quiet evening to share the news. After they'd finished supper and were sitting before the fire, Caleb reading aloud from a book of Wordsworth's poetry while she mended a shirt. "Caleb," she interrupted during a pause between poems, "I have something to tell you." He lowered the book, immediately attentive. "What is it?" Taking a deep breath, Abigail set aside her mending and met his gaze directly. "We're going to have a baby. In spring." For a moment, he seemed frozen, the news too monumental to process. Then his face transformed with joy so profound it brought tears to Abigail's eyes. "A baby," he repeated, setting the book aside and moving to kneel before her chair. He placed a reverent hand on her still, flat stomach. "Our child." "Yes," she confirmed, covering his hand with hers. "Are you happy?" In answer, he gathered her into his arms, holding her as if she were made of the most precious porcelain. "Happy doesn't begin to describe it," he murmured against her hair. "Abigail, you've given me everything I never dared hope for." The months that followed were filled with preparations and planning. Caleb converted the small room adjacent to theirs into a nursery, crafting a cradle from pine with his own hands. Abigail sewed tiny garments in the evenings, her expanding waistline a source of pride and wonder to them both. As her pregnancy progressed, Caleb became increasingly protective, insisting she rest more and delegate heavier tasks to him or to young Jimmy Peterson, whom they hired to help with the increasing workload. Abigail complied with some tasks but firmly maintained her independence in others, determined to remain an active partner in their enterprise even as she prepared for motherhood. Winter arrived with unusual mildness that year, allowing ranch work to continue later into the season than normal. By Christmas, Abigail's condition was pronounced enough to prompt good-natured teasing from neighbors who joined them for a holiday gathering. "Looks like Turner's finally producing something besides cattle, old mister." Jenkins joked, raising his glass in a toast that brought color to Abigail's cheeks and a proud grin to Caleb's face. January brought heavier snow and the nesting instinct in full force. Abigail found herself reorganizing cupboards, washing and rewashing baby clothes, and making lists of supplies needed before the birth. Caleb watched her activities with fond amusement, stepping in only when she attempted tasks that might strain her increasingly unwieldy body. By February, the baby's movements were visible through her clothing a foot or elbow pressing outward, a rolling motion that fascinated Caleb, who would spend evenings with his hand resting on her belly, waiting for their child to acknowledge his presence. "Do you think it's a boy or a girl?" he asked one night as they lay in bed, his palm warm against the taut skin of her stomach. "A boy," Abigail answered without hesitation. "Strong, like his father." Caleb shook his head. "A girl, I think, with her mother's spirit and determination." "We'll know soon enough," she reminded him, covering his hand with hers as the baby delivered a particularly enthusiastic kick. Another 6 weeks, according to Mrs. Jenkins. But the baby had other plans. In early March, during a late-season blizzard that isolated the ranch completely, Abigail woke in the pre-dawn hours to a sharp pain and wetness soaking the bed. "Caleb," she gasped, clutching his arm. "It's time." He was instantly awake, his expression shifting from confusion to alarm as he registered her meaning. "But it's too early," he protested, even as he was already moving, lighting the lamp, helping her to sit up. "Not by much," Abigail assured him, though privately she shared his concern. "And first babies are often early." The next hours passed in a blur of pain and determination. With the roads impassable, there was no possibility of fetching the doctor from town or even Mrs. Jenkins, who had experience with birthing. They were on their own. Caleb proved himself the steadiest of partners, heating water, preparing the room according to Abigail's instructions, and providing constant support as the contractions intensified. His military experience had exposed him to enough field medicine that he maintained his composure even as Abigail's pain increased. "You're doing wonderfully," he encouraged, wiping her brow with a cool cloth as she gripped his hand through another contraction. "Just a little longer." Dawn had broken by the time Abigail felt the overwhelming urge to push. With Caleb supporting her, murmuring constant encouragement, she bore down with all her strength, focusing through the pain on the miracle they were about to welcome. At precisely 8 o'clock in the morning, their daughter slipped into the world with a lusty cry that proclaimed her health despite her slightly early arrival. Caleb, tears streaming unashamedly down his face, cut the cord and placed the squalling infant on Abigail's chest. "You were right," Abigail whispered, gazing down at the red-faced miracle they had created. "A girl." "She's perfect," Caleb said, his voice thick with emotion as he stroked a finger along their daughter's cheek. "Just like her mother." They named her Catherine Grace Turner, Catherine for Caleb's mother, Grace for the blessing she represented in their lives. She had Abigail's fair coloring but Caleb's blue eyes and determined chin, a perfect blending of them both. The first weeks of Catherine's life coincided with the arrival of spring, as if nature itself celebrated her birth. The snow melted, revealing tender green shoots pushing through the earth. Calves frolicked in the pastures, and birds returned to build nests in the eaves of the house and barn. Parenthood transformed Caleb and Abigail in ways neither had anticipated. Caleb, always gentle, developed a tenderness that manifested in the way he cradled his daughter, sang to her in the evenings, and took on additional tasks to allow Abigail more rest. Abigail discovered reserves of patience and intuition that guided her through the challenges of nursing and sleepless nights. Together, they established new rhythms that accommodated their expanded family while maintaining the partnership that had become the foundation of their marriage. Catherine accompanied them in a sling as they worked around the ranch, her presence a constant reminder of the love that had brought them together. By summer, with Catherine growing stronger each day, they felt confident enough to make the journey into Willow Creek for the 4th of July celebration. It would be Catherine's first public appearance and an opportunity to introduce her to the wider community. The town had changed little since Abigail's desperate days there, but her perspective had transformed completely. Where once she had seen only the end of her hopes, she now saw a place where she had found a new beginning. As they walked down the main street, Catherine secure in her father's arms, Abigail spotted a familiar figure, the auctioneer, who had tried to cheat her that fateful day. "Mr. Thornton," she greeted him pleasantly, enjoying his obvious surprise at her transformed appearance. "Allow me to introduce my husband, Caleb Turner, and our daughter, Catherine." The man's eyes widened as he connected the prosperous rancher before him with the desperate widow he had dismissed. "Mrs. Turner," he stammered. "A pleasure to see you looking so well." "Life has been kind," Abigail replied, exchanging a private smile with Caleb. "Very kind indeed." Later, as they picnicked under the shade of cottonwood trees, watching the town's modest parade, Caleb slipped an arm around Abigail's waist. "Happy?" he asked, his eyes crinkling at the corners in the way she had come to love. Abigail looked at their daughter, sleeping peacefully on a blanket beside them, then at the man who had offered her salvation and found his own in return. "Completely," she answered, leaning into his embrace. "I never imagined, that day with Daisy, that losing everything would lead to gaining so much more." "Speaking of Daisy," Caleb said with a chuckle, "did you see her this morning? Standing guard by Catherine's window like a devoted sentry. I think she's appointed herself the baby's personal protector." Abigail laughed, picturing the goat's possessive behavior toward their daughter. From last goat to family guardian, she's come up in the world too. As the sun began its descent, casting long shadows across the town square, they gathered their belongings and prepared for the journey home, not to a house, but to the home they had built together, a sanctuary of love and purpose that had grown from the most unlikely of beginnings. Riding beside her husband, their daughter secure in her arms, Abigail reflected on the journey that had brought her here. The path had been neither straight nor easy, marked by loss and struggle that had nearly broken her spirit. Yet those very challenges had led her to this moment, to a love deeper than she had known possible, to a family created from shared dreams and mutual respect, to a future bright with promise. As Turner's Rest appeared on the horizon, bathed in the golden light of sunset, Abigail felt a profound sense of gratitude wash over her. She had been about to sell her last goat, the final vestige of a broken dream, when a stranger had offered not charity, but opportunity. In accepting, she had found not just shelter but a true home, not just a provider but a partner, not just security but love in its purest form. "We're home," Caleb said as they approached the ranch, his voice warm with the knowledge that the word encompassed far more than the buildings ahead. "Yes," Abigail agreed, holding their daughter close as she looked toward the future they would build together. "We're home,"